Hello and welcome. Today we're diving into one of the most extraordinary moments of Pacific warfare, a battle that not only tested the limits of human courage, but also revealed a shocking truth about technological change in combat. On the morning of November the 20th, 1943, on Betio Island's Red Beach 2, an unlikely spectacle unfolded amidst the chaos of war. Sand geysers erupting in perfect, machine-like patterns, as if guided by an unseen force. A Marine officer crawling forward with a weapon that seemed out of place in the traditional Japanese mindset would soon demonstrate that old doctrines of spiritual resilience and hand-to-hand combat were about to be shattered. What if the Japanese defenders had never seen anything like it? Could their deeply ingrained beliefs in honor and spiritual strength withstand the relentless firepower of a weapon weighing less than 20 pounds, capable of firing over 60 rounds per second? How did a single Marine's Browning automatic rifle, an industrial marvel, turn the tide in just 20 minutes? And what did it say about the future of warfare on those Pacific islands? All these questions lead to a single urgent one. How could a doctrine rooted in loyalty, spiritual power, and tradition compete with the brutal efficiency of modern mechanized firepower? In this video, we will trace the shocking shift from age-old martial virtues to the relentless march of industrialized warfare, uncovering the truth behind the technological revolution that rendered centuries of martial culture obsolete. The most astonishing revelations are yet to come, and it all begins right now. On the cold morning of November the 20th, in the year of 1943, precisely at 2300 hours, a remarkable and pivotal event unfolded on the shores of Betio Island, within the Tarawa atoll, part of the Gilbert Islands in the Pacific. At this critical juncture, on the infamous Red Beach 2, the sands erupted in a highly unusual and calculated pattern that defenders among the Japanese forces, those who had taken up positions in fortified bunkers, had never before witnessed. These eruptions, meticulously choreographed by an unseen hand, resembled geysers of sand and debris shooting forth in perfectly timed, evenly spaced bursts, moving directly toward hidden defensive positions concealed beneath the palms and logs of the bunkers. Each of these spray-like jets of earth arrived with the unerring, mechanical consistency of a well-trained machine, as if guided by a calculating engine rather than the chaos of battle. As the Japanese naval infantry looked out through the narrow firing slits of their log-built strongholds, they observed a striking scene: a Marine First Lieutenant named William Hawkins, crawling steadily forward with an object that appeared to be an oversized rifle. It was a weapon that seemed almost out of place amidst the traditional notions of combat held by the Japanese defenders. According to the Japanese military manuals and doctrines, a body of knowledge ingrained within their forces, American soldiers supposedly relied heavily on massed rifle fire and had weapons perceived as inferior in terms of spiritual power and close combat prowess compared to the deadly bayonet charges that Japanese troops cherished. These manuals emphasized the significance of mental strength and the spiritual resilience of soldiers, disparaging the effectiveness of individual firearms in favor of resolute hand-to-hand combat fueled by a sense of honor and conviction. However, in that moment on the battlefield, Lieutenant Hawkins was about to demonstrate why such doctrines would soon prove profoundly outdated. The weapon he carried was the Browning automatic rifle, or BAR, a device that weighed approximately 19 pounds when unloaded and was capable of firing over 30 caliber rounds of Springfield ammunition at varied rates of fire. There were two distinct settings for its rate of fire: a slow setting, at about 300 to 450 rounds per minute, and a second, faster setting, pushing the rate to between 500 and 650 rounds. Numbers that, in practical terms, could see a 20-round magazine emptied in less than 3 seconds when the gun was set to its maximum firing speed. What happened during those critical seconds in the assault would serve as a stark revelation of a fundamental flaw in the Japanese military doctrine. The entire tactical approach, rooted in spiritual strength and individual valor, was about to be rendered obsolete, an absence of relevance amidst the brutal efficiency of mechanized firepower. This moment would echo across countless other Pacific islands, where combatants from vastly different military cultures clashed. one side rooted in a tradition of spiritual resilience, the other propelled by industrialized, mechanized warfare. The Browning automatic rifle was more than merely a firearm. It represented the extension of American industrial principles into the realm of infantry combat. Born from mass production concepts and engineered for volume and reliability, it facilitated an entirely new kind of battlefield dominance, one where volume of fire could overwhelm even the most motivated enemies, regardless of their spiritual or mental resolve. The Japanese troops, who had been indoctrinated since the earliest days of their military training to prefer death over retreat, were about to find out that sheer courage alone could no longer suffice against the relentless advance of automatic weapons, which delivered destruction with the sterile precision of industry. Merely 20 minutes after Lieutenant Hawkins initiated his assault by crawling to within firing range, his platoon of sharpshooters and scouts had already succeeded in neutralizing 3 significant Japanese strongpoints through sustained, concentrated bursts of fire with the BAR. By now, the battle for Betio was underway, not with the traditional image of hand-to-hand combat or heroism as defined by older martial traditions, but through an intense demonstration of modern firepower, an artillery of automatic fire that directly challenged and ultimately contradicted deep-seated Japanese beliefs about warfare. For the Imperial Japanese Army, their military strategies had solidified into doctrines inherited from successes against China and Russia, where conventional tactics and spiritual tenacity had carried them through prior situations. Examining the Japanese military manual of 1909, still in use during the 1900s and 43, reveals the stark contrast in the value placed on different combat skills and philosophies. Of the many pages dedicated to martial virtues, saintly power, and bayonet fighting, 17 pages to be precise, only scant attention was given to the topic of automatic weapons, which received just a couple of paragraphs. The Japanese military philosophy emphasized a concept called sashin, a form of spiritual power that was believed capable of compensating for material and technological disadvantages through willpower alone. The Bushido Code, infused deeply into their martial culture, reinforced the idea that a soldier driven by unwavering resolve, loyalty, and spiritual strength could overcome superior numbers or equipment. This was, during the intense and tumultuous campaigns of World War II, particularly in the Pacific Theater, the United States armed its infantrymen with a range of advanced weaponry designed to dominate the battlefield through overwhelming firepower. One concept that revolutionized the nature of infantry combat was the strategic allocation of automatic rifles to every squad, transforming the traditional demeanor of bravery and individual heroism into a systematic deployment of firepower. Instead of assigning only a few specialized weapons to support units, the U.S. military recognized that wielding multiple automatic rifles per squad, functioning as precise, dedicated support weapons with their own trained crews, could effectively suppress and neutralize enemy forces. This approach marked a fundamental shift in tactical thinking, emphasizing the necessity of volume and consistency in suppressive fire to gain and hold ground, often at the expense of older notions rooted in individual valor. The Japanese military, however, found this modern concept of widespread automatic firepower utterly baffling and incompatible with their traditional doctrines. In their worldview, combat was primarily driven by individual courage, martial spirit, and close-range engagement, with less emphasis on the collective suppression that automatic weapons facilitated. This fundamental misunderstanding would, over time, prove disastrous when facing the technological and tactical advantages of the American forces. On many islands, Japanese soldiers would come to realize that American infantry squads possessed more automatic firepower than entire Japanese platoons had previously envisioned or could counter effectively. A symbol of this technological disparity was the Browning automatic rifle, more colloquially known as the BAR. The United States produced these weapons at extraordinary rates throughout the war, aiming to capitalize on their battlefield potency. The presence of the BAR became a powerful emblem of the American approach to infantry combat, one that democratized firepower, allowing each regular soldier to assume a role once reserved for specialized, crew-served machine guns. The design of this weapon reflected a significant shift in small arm capabilities, a shift that the Japanese military system simply could not comprehend. Conceived in 1917 by the legendary engineer John Browning and refined through intervening years of development, the BAR was mass-produced in quantities that left Japanese military planners stunned. Its proliferation meant that ordinary American infantrymen wielded a level of firepower that previously had been afforded only to well-equipped, dedicated machine gun teams. By the autumn of 1943, American manufacturing was pouring out bars at an astonishing pace, delivering a decisive technological advantage. American factories, which had shifted into full gear, could produce these automatic rifles in quantities that would have seemed impossible to Japanese strategists. The New England Small Arms Corporation, a dedicated armament manufacturer, produced roughly 168,380 such rifles during the entire conflict. Meanwhile, IBM, a company widely known at the time solely for its business computing machines, retooled its factories for war production, managing to deliver around 20,000 of these weapons to the American war effort. Additional manufacturers, including the Marlin Rockwell Corporation, contributed further to this scale of production, culminating in a total of approximately 350,000 BARs fabricated during the war. For the Japanese military, these figures were almost incomprehensible, considering their craftsmanship model. Traditionally, Japanese soldiers and craftsmen meticulously assembled each Type 96 machine gun by hand in workshops where the barrels, receivers, and components were fitted with great precision, often requiring weeks of dedicated labor to produce each weapon. The vast industrialized production of the BAR, with its story of rapid, large-scale manufacturing on an unprecedented scale, was radically different from this careful artisan approach. Among the American servicemen who demonstrated the devastating impact of this technological edge was Marine Sergeant John Basilone. A hero of Guadalcanal, Basilone would later be awarded the Medal of Honor for his actions during this fierce campaign. During October of 1942, he manned both machine guns and BARs, exhibiting remarkable bravery and skill. On Guadalcanal, Basilone's effective operation of combined automatic weapons was instrumental in repelling an attack involving roughly 3,000 Japanese soldiers. His precise and sustained firepower helped frustrate the enemy's human wave tactics, vividly illustrating how the widespread deployment of American automatic rifles could turn a small unit into a formidable defensive force capable of thwarting larger enemy assaults. While the specifications of the BAR were impressive, with its ability to fire the potent .30-06 cartridge at rates varying up to 650 rounds per minute and an effective range exceeding 1,000 yards, what truly made it revolutionary was the doctrine surrounding its employment. The tactical strategy integrated with the weapon changed how small units fought. Every Marine rifle squad, by 1943, typically possessed 3 BARs, allowing a continuous, organic, automatic fire capability within the squad. Similarly, on the Army side, each squad was equipped with at least 1 BAR. This meant that American small units carried with them an intrinsic automatic firepower component, capable of being deployed immediately in combat, without the need to wait for machine gun teams to set up heavier, crew-served weapons. The significance of this widespread adoption was vividly demonstrated during the early Pacific campaigns. Amidst the chaos of machine gun fire, a web of interlocking fields of automatic weapon fire spread out, covering the entire Marine line with deadly precision. Barbed wire obstacles and strategically positioned machine guns were arrayed throughout the defensive perimeter, creating a formidable obstacle for any attacking force. Among the soldiers manning these positions was Private First Class Albert Schmid, whose bravery and skill while operating a machine gun earned him widespread recognition for his extraordinary actions on that harrowing night. However, the ultimate victory in this fierce engagement was not credited solely to Schmid or any single soldier. Rather, it was the collective, relentless firepower of all automatic weapon systems, including the 12 machine guns placed within the rifle companies, that turned the tide against the invading Japanese forces at that moment. Each of these machine gun crews had been meticulously trained to fire in coordinated bursts, typically delivering 6-round bursts that lasted roughly 1 second before shifting to new positions to prevent overheating and maintain continuous suppressive fire. This disciplined approach ensured a relentless barrage of bullets that kept enemy soldiers under constant pressure. When the Japanese forces, driven by sheer momentum, charged toward the flickering muzzle flashes of these weapons, they encountered only empty space, an illusion created by the disciplined and well-positioned fire, which left them vulnerable to devastating counterattacks. By the end of the battle, only 128 Japanese soldiers remained from Ichiki's original force of 917 men, the staggering numbers revealing the brutal effectiveness of American firepower amid the chaos of combat. The mathematical calculations of firepower underscored this reality. A single Japanese rifle squad, comprising 13 men armed with bolt-action rifles, Arisaka rifles, could theoretically unleash around 65 aimed rounds each minute. In stark contrast, a Marine squad equipped with 3 machine guns could deliver about 150 rounds within the first 4 seconds, enough to inflict devastating damage before the Japanese could reload or prepare their second shot. This overwhelming force forced the Japanese to retreat into underground shelter, where they hoped to find refuge from the relentless American fire. By late 1943, the Japanese military had developed elaborate subterranean defenses, transforming their island fortresses into intricate cave networks. These were far from simple holes in the ground. They were complex tunnels and chambers interconnected through a web of tunnels, creating a labyrinth of fortified positions. These underground fortresses were equipped with interlocking fields of fire, enabling defenders to cover multiple angles and making direct assaults extraordinarily difficult. Japanese military doctrine held that these underground positions were virtually impregnable, defensible only through overwhelming artillery bombardments or costly direct assaults. It was the advent of the Browning automatic rifle, or BAR, that fundamentally altered this daunting calculus and challenged the notion of Japanese invincibility underground. On November the 22nd, in the year 1943, Marine forces encountered Japan's first mature, sophisticated cave defenses on the island of Tarawa. This encounter led to the development of a specialized tactic that would become standard Marine procedure in tackling subterranean defenses. The strategy was to approach the cave at an oblique angle rather than head-on. Marines would position a BAR gunner approximately 25 yards from the cave entrance and unleash a continuous, rapid-fire burst in a deliberate figure-8 pattern, firing an entire magazine into the mouth of the cave in a sustained, rhythmic barrage. The simple physics behind this tactic proved devastating. The powerful .30 caliber rounds fired by the bar maintained lethal velocity even as they ricocheted off the walls, ceiling, and floor within the underground chambers. When a single burst was fired into a cave opening, it could fill the entire interior with bouncing projectiles, greatly increasing the likelihood of hitting enemy soldiers, who, in most cases, had trained to hold their positions with little hope of survival. The Marines soon discovered that firing a 30-round magazine directly at a cave's entrance created what they called the hornet's nest effect. The bullets ricocheted wildly off the uneven surfaces, ceiling, and floor, bouncing unpredictably in all directions. This chaotic pattern of bullets turned the subterranean environment into a lethal trap for Japanese soldiers, making escape impossible and survival unlikely. Japanese defenders, who had trained rigorously to endure in these fortified positions, found themselves quickly overwhelmed. Death often arrived before they could even glimpse their approaching enemy, who was now reinforced by these devastating new tactics. Fast forward to June the 15th in the year 1944. The location was Saipan, part of the Mariana Islands, and the Japanese defenders had fought and prepared for months, taking lessons learned from earlier battles such as Tarawa and others. Commanded by Lieutenant General Yoshitsugu Saito, approximately 31,000 Japanese troops had established defenses believed to be nearly impregnable. These defenses were meticulous. They had studied American tactics carefully, prepared multiple lines of resistance, and positioned their troops to withstand almost any form of attack. However, what they failed to fully anticipate was the sheer destructive capacity of American automatic firepower, particularly the widespread use of the heaviest of firepower relied heavily on the modern marvel of the automatic rifle, frequently referred to simply as the BAR, shorthand for Browning automatic rifle. These formidable weapons transformed infantry units into mobile, hard-hitting platforms capable of unleashing a relentless stream of automatic fire. Their strategic significance was vividly demonstrated during the Battle of Purple Heart Ridge on Saipan, where their effectiveness was on full display. The Japanese defenders, well entrenched within naturally fortified positions, nestled within coral limestone caves, had meticulously constructed mutually supporting defensive stations. These fortified points were believed to be virtually immune to flanking maneuvers, making them seemingly invulnerable. Yet the resilience of these positions was challenged by the sheer volume of American firepower. Private First Class Harold Agrim, a Marine who was not even primarily assigned to operate a bar, but found himself amidst intense fighting, earned a posthumous Medal of Honor for his bravery in evacuating 45 wounded comrades while under relentless enemy fire. His heroic actions exemplified the indomitable spirit that allowed BAR crews to hold their ground, maintain suppressive fire, and adapt to fluid combat conditions despite the deadly complex positioning of Japanese defenders. The statistics emerging from the Saipan campaign were nothing short of staggering. Over the course of just 3 weeks, the 2nd Marine Division alone fired approximately 8,700,000 rounds of .36 caliber ammunition. A significant portion of this devastating volume was delivered through Browning automatic rifles and associated machine guns, which continually clogged the battlefield with a hail of lead. This immense expenditure of firepower reflected not only the physical destruction wrought upon Japanese military formations, but also had a profound psychological effect. The Japanese, who had anticipated defensive advantages rooted perhaps in spiritual resolve or strategic terrain, were deftly outmatched by the raw, relentless intensity of American industrial and military might. As American weapons industries supplied an almost limitless stream of ammunition, the Japanese forces faced a brutal arithmetic. They could match American troops in manpower only with great difficulty, but no amount of spiritual fortitude could withstand the relentless firepower that was continuously raining down upon them. The impact extended well beyond immediate casualties. It eroded Japanese military confidence, demoralizing their soldiers and sapping their will to fight. The sound of this automatic fire became a weapon in its own right. The distinctive rapid thudding of the BAR, quite unlike the more chaotic and less controlled sound of typical machine guns, signified that American firepower was both close at hand and constantly hunting. Veterans vividly recalled the psychological toll. The deafening roll of multiple BARS opening simultaneously created an auditory landscape of thunder that announced the overwhelming presence of American firepower. This auditory assault hammered into enemy soldiers a message of inevitable defeat. This psychological effect was magnified by the strict discipline drilled into American Marines. Unlike the often indiscriminate firing that characterized many early conflicts, Marine training emphasized the use of brief, controlled bursts that maximized ammunition efficiency and target accuracy. Such measured firing not only conserved valuable rounds, but also inflicted casualties with surgical precision. Contrasting with Japanese expectations of reckless American shooting, Marine squads executed their fire with discipline, turning each burst into a strategic attack designed to eliminate enemy personnel, rather than simply suppress their movements. By mid-1944, captured Japanese documents confirmed what battlefield observation indicated, that Japanese soldiers had been instructed to identify and prioritize targeting BAR gunners above all else. These automatic riflemen formed the backbone of American small unit tactics, serving as the primary axis around which assaults and defenses were organized. The ability to quickly suppress and eliminate enemy positions with rapid, sustained fire made BAR teams a formidable threat, and Japanese soldiers recognized their importance as a key element dividing victory from defeat. However, despite the clear tactical significance of the BAR, recognizing them amid chaos and movement in combat was extraordinarily difficult. The weapons moved constantly, swayed by pairings of trained soldiers working in tandem, and each Marine squad often operated multiple automatic rifles, making real-time identification a near impossibility amidst the din of battle. By February of the year 1945, the relentless conflict on the island of Iwima had stretched into a 4th year of confrontation. The Japanese, commanded by Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, had relied on an intricate system of defenses that included extensive tunnel networks running more than 11 miles underground. representing the pinnacle of Japanese cave warfare doctrine. Kurabayashi's forces consisted of roughly 21,000 soldiers who had studied every previous American engagement, adapting and refining counter-tactics to resist the advances of their adversaries. Despite these formidable defenses, the American military adapted its tactics to match the evolving nature of the Japanese defenses and battlefield conditions. The use of the automatic rifle, particularly in the form of the BAR, had shifted from a primarily defensive weapon during World War I to an offensive agent in the Pacific Theater. Marines now employed specialized tactics that had been forged through bitter experience and intense combat. Leading the front lines, automatic riflemen, referred to simply as BAR men, became integral to offensive operations. Their role was to advance ahead. He was in the midst of leading his machine gun squads forward when tragedy struck. He was struck down by an enemy mortar blast. Having endured some of the fiercest fighting of the Pacific War, he had survived moments of extreme peril, only to be killed within the earliest hours of the battle. At Iwima, a mere 1,083 Japanese soldiers were taken prisoner out of an initial garrison of roughly 21,000 troops. The remaining defenders perished in place, many of them sealed within caves by devastating artillery and small arms fire, fighting to the bitter end. During the course of 36 relentless days of combat, American Marines reportedly expended approximately 12 million rounds of small arms ammunition. To put this staggering figure into perspective, the United States Marine Corps' 28th Regiment, during their dangerous assault on Mount Suribachi, consumed some 90,000 rounds of armor-piercing ammunition over just 5 days. The fighting on April 1st of the year 1945, during the Okinawa campaign, epitomized the ferocity and scale of the conflict. The culminating battle on Okinawa vividly showcased the overwhelming dominance of American automatic firearms. The Japanese 32nd Army, tasked with defending the island, numbered roughly 130,000 soldiers. This figure included Okinawan conscripts recruited into the effort. They had meticulously prepared their defenses, learning every lesson from previous battles and deploying every possible adaptation to slow the advancing American forces. Their battlefield strategy represented a final, desperate attempt at victory, relying heavily on fortified positions and pre-planned ambushes. Yet facing them was not merely a force equipped with Browning automatic rifles. It was the might of a vast American war machine that had perfected the art of mass production and widespread dissemination of automatic weaponry. By this point in the war, the United States had manufactured over 300,000 Browning automatic rifles, more than enough to equip entire units with superior firepower. Some U.S. Army units had even abandoned formal organization altogether in favor of more aggressive tactics, employing one automatic rifle for every 2 or 3 soldiers, thereby maximizing volume of fire. The 96th Infantry Division reported carrying unusually high numbers of automatic rifles, significantly more than their officially authorized allotments, as soldiers understood that survival in the brutal jungle and cave combat depended on overwhelming firepower. To make use of this advantage, they wielded their weapons relentlessly, unleashing continuous streams of automatic fire on Japanese positions. Colonel Hirami Yahara, the senior staff officer of the Japanese 32nd Army and one of the few high-ranking officers to survive the intense fighting, later revealed in post-war accounts the critical disparity in material strength between the two sides. While some details of his reflections on the Browning automatic rifle remain unverified via available translations, his descriptions note that the main Japanese defensive line at Shuri fell not on the strength of massive assaults, but rather through systematic, methodical application of firepower, cave by cave, position after position, dismantled piece by well-aimed automatic fire. The Japanese defenders, who had prepared their spiritual resolve for the brutal conflict, ultimately found themselves facing industrial-scale warfare that exploited the very technological edge the Americans had developed. The story of the Browning automatic rifle became in many ways a symbol of American industrial capacity and logistical prowess. While Japanese soldiers endured death inside caves and hideouts, American factories undertook extraordinary production efforts and technological feats that would have seemed unimaginable to Japanese military planners. In 1941, IBM's factory located in Poughkeepsie, New York, originally engaged in manufacturing typewriters and calculating machinery, retooled its assembly lines exclusively for the mass production of automatic rifles. By 1944, this facility had produced some 20,000 bars, each tested and manufactured to tolerances more precise than the hand-fitted weapons used by Japanese forces. The manufacturing effort was further amplified by the New England Small Arms Corporation, which produced the majority of American wartime automatic rifles, amassing over 168,000 units, demonstrating the power of American industrial mobilization on a truly grand scale. Additionally, the Marlin Rockwell Company, which had limited experience in weapons manufacturing prior to 1941, constructed new facilities distinctly dedicated to automatic rifle production. Meanwhile, internationally, the Swedish arms manufacturer Carl Gustaf's Stads factory, a licensee of the Browning automatic rifle, explored avenues to supply weapons to allies neutral in the conflict, reportedly offering to sell the rifles to Japan through neutral channels as early as 1943. The Japanese military attaché in Stockholm undertook an investigation to assess the feasibility of such negotiations, but Japan's lack of necessary foreign currencies and adequate shipping capacity proved insurmountable obstacles that thwarted their attempts at acquiring the American-designed weapon through diplomatic means. In sum, the tale of the Browning automatic rifle during the Pacific Theater encapsulates not only the horrors and persistence of ground combat, but also the profound influence of American industrial capacity, mirroring the evolution of warfare itself, from individual heroism and tactical. In the context of the broader industrial efforts during World War II, the production and deployment of small arms, particularly machine guns such as the BAR, Browning automatic rifle, played a pivotal role in shaping the war's outcome. Analyzing production figures reveals significant disparities between the United States and Japan, highlighting the vast industrial gap that contributed to Allied dominance. Over the course of the war, American manufacturing lines churned out approximately 350,000 BAR units in total, a staggering quantity when contrasted with Japan's output, which amounted to roughly 41,000 units of Type 96 and 53,000 of Type 99 light machine guns. This comparison exposes a clear and pronounced industrial disparity. The United States produced nearly 4 times as many BARs as Japan did of all light machine gun varieties combined. The effectiveness of the bar in combat was intrinsically tied to the availability of ammunition, another aspect where American industry demonstrated unparalleled capacity and foresight. Each soldier operating a bar typically carried between 12 and 15 magazines, translating to roughly 240 to 300 rounds ready for immediate use during engagements. Beyond what the individual could carry, a squad of Marines was supplied with an additional buffer of ammunition, allowing them to carry around 2,000 rounds of BAR ammunition, along with standard rifle rounds. During the conflict, American ammunition plants manufactured billions of rounds of small arms ammunition, ensuring that supply could never become a limiting factor. Although precise verification of the claim that the United States produced about 21,036 million rounds of small arms ammunition remains challenging, estimates suggest that the total output of American small arms ammunition at the peak of production reached approximately 47 billion rounds of all types during the entirety of the war. This immense volume of ammunition allowed U.S. forces to operate with a level of sustained firepower that the Japanese military, burdened by limited resources and poor industrial infrastructure, simply could not match. To illustrate, during the battles at Okinawa, spanning approximately 82 days, the U.S. 10th Army alone expended an estimated 60 million rounds of small arms ammunition. Within the 24th Corps, records show that 25 million rounds of rifle and machine gun rounds were fired, underscoring the intensity of combat and the formidable firepower brought to bear against entrenched Japanese defenders. Japanese soldiers, in stark contrast, typically had access to only 100 rounds per man for an entire engagement, a paltry sum compared to American quantities, and often exhausted within seconds. The technological and logistical advantages of American weaponry and ammunition availability translated into a profound disparity on the battlefield, where firepower played a decisive role in the outcome. Behind these statistics stood countless human beings, soldiers fighting and dying in the brutal, industrialized form of warfare that characterized the Second World War. According to post-war Japanese government statistics, the total losses among Japanese military personnel reached approximately 2,300,000 dead. However, research by Japanese historians indicates that roughly 60% of these fatalities, around 1,400,000, resulted not from direct combat but from starvation and disease, conditions driven by the war's destructive impact on Japan's economy and infrastructure. The remaining casualties came from all forms of combat, including artillery bombardments, aerial raids, naval gunfire, and small arms fire. While it is impossible to specify exactly how many of these deaths were directly attributable to the use of the BAR or similar automatic weapons, it is undeniable that the contribution of firepower, amplified by superior industrial capacity, greatly increased American combat effectiveness. In the Pacific theater, this firepower advantage translated into tactical successes often achieved at ratios exceeding 10-1. American forces inflicted casualties far greater than those they suffered, primarily due to their ability to maintain suppressive fire and rapidly maneuver against Japanese positions. By the middle of the year 1944, U.S. Marines had developed standardized procedures for clearing caves, a task that had proved particularly perilous and complex. Drawing on experience from battles on Tarawa through Saipan, their tactical manuals laid out systematic methods to neutralize these formidable strongholds. The prescribed approach involved positioning a BAR gunner at an oblique angle relative to the cave entrance, maintaining a standoff of approximately 25 yards, an effective distance to strike with precision. The operator would then fire a full magazine in a controlled, disciplined pattern to maximize suppressive effect, while white phosphorus grenades would be employed to mark cleared caves for subsequent follow-up. This process of clearing caves, repeated thousands of times during the island hopping campaign, evolved from a perilous, close-quarters melee into a mechanically executed sequence of operations that greatly increased operational safety and efficiency. Interestingly, Japanese defenders, who had meticulously designed their cave defenses to create lethal kill zones, found themselves at a disadvantage as the American procedures turned these fortifications from deadly traps into manageable military tasks. The systematic, industrialized approach to cave clearing exemplified how the integration of firepower, combined with precise tactics and established procedures, could turn even heavily fortified positions into pathways for further conquest. A testament amid the chaos of combat, countless lives were often hanging in precarious balance, sometimes caught in the deadly grip of death chambers, where bullets like swift and merciless bar rounds ricocheted unpredictably across the confined barriered spaces where escape was nearly impossible. The difference between American and Japanese automatic weaponry was striking, not merely in terms of quantity, but also profoundly in quality, showcasing a clear and fundamental disparity in design philosophy and manufacturing approach. The American Browning automatic rifle, widely known as the BAR, embodied decades of relentless industrial refinement, a mastery of mass production techniques, and an extraordinary level of mechanical precision that Japanese manufacturing methods simply could not rival. This disparity was evident when comparing the BAR to the closest Japanese equivalents, the Type 96 and Type 99 light machine guns. These Japanese weapons, though formidable, required two-man crews to operate effectively, and they weighed more than their American counterpart. Specifically, the Type 96 weighed approximately 19.2 kilograms, and the Type 99, equipped with a bipod, was around 21.6 kilograms. Moreover, these Japanese guns suffered from inconsistencies stemming from their production processes, which were rooted in craft-based manufacture rather than large-scale, repeatable assembly. Japanese arms production in that era relied heavily on small workshops where skilled artisans focused on craftsmanship rather than scalability, an approach that made it difficult to achieve the tight tolerances necessary for reliable automatic fire. Springs would break unexpectedly, extractors would fail or warp, and feed mechanisms would jam at inopportune moments. Problems tied directly to the metallurgy and build quality of these weapons. A further critical difference lay in the materials used. The American BAR's barrels benefited from chrome molybdenum steel, a durable alloy that, thanks to advanced heat treatment, could withstand sustained firing without warping or rapid degradation. In stark contrast, Japanese weapons used inferior steel alloys, which demanded careful and skillful heat treatment by skilled craftsmen, an impractical process to reproduce on the mass scale required for wartime production. As a result, the American approach, focusing on innovations in manufacturing techniques, produced weapons that not only outperformed their Japanese counterparts in quality, but also in quantity, ultimately allowing the United States to produce better firearms more rapidly than Japan could produce inferior ones through craft-based methods. This technological difference fundamentally transformed the tactics and effectiveness of marksmanship during the war. The traditional emphasis on individual skill in shooting was significantly overshadowed by the American use of the BAR as a tool to systematically apply suppressive firepower. A trained Japanese soldier might carefully aim with his rifle, relying on precise shooting skills, but American automatic riflemen adopted a different methodology. They did not rely on meticulous aiming in the traditional sense. Instead, they employed what was called walk fire, moving their weapon across a target area, adjusting their aim based on continuous observation of where the bullets impacted. This method of fire, less about pinpoint accuracy and more about saturating an area, represented a revolutionary shift in infantry tactics. Japanese soldiers, specialists in concealed movement and meticulous camouflage, found this approach challenging to counter. The suppressive area denial fire of the BAR meant that an enemy rifleman could unleash a continuous stream of bullets across an entire hillside or patch of terrain from a single magazine, forcing hidden Japanese troops to either break cover or be annihilated. This strategy effectively minimized the importance of traditional sniping or targeted shots by forcing the enemy into the uncomfortable position of revealing their positions through their reactions to sustained, indiscriminate fire. In essence, applying overwhelming area fire replaced the older focus on precise marksmanship, transforming infantry combat into a game of firepower dominance, something that Japanese tactical doctrines struggled to adapt to or counter successfully. The effectiveness of the BAR was entirely reliant on the tremendous logistical infrastructure supporting American forces. Every weapon in combat was part of a vast and complex supply chain that spanned from factories on the American mainland to distant Pacific battlefronts. Every magazine, every round of ammunition was powered by a web of freight trains, cargo ships, and meticulously organized supply dumps. An infrastructure so massive that it defied the expectations of Japanese military planners, who could only comprehend logistics as an afterthought rather than a core element of battlefield success. For example, a single regiment of American Marines in active combat might consume approximately 40,000 rounds of small arms ammunition each week, a staggering amount. Supplying such quantities demanded dedicated supply ships constantly traversing from manufacturing plants along the west coast of the United States to strategic bases throughout the Pacific, establishing a continuous flow that was meticulously maintained. The physical infrastructure required to sustain this level of logistical effort, ports with handling equipment, storage depots, harbor facilities, and transportation networks, represented an enormous investment, far exceeding the entire military budget of Japan at that time. The logistics behind the supply of American firepower, exemplified by weapons like the BAR, were as much a part of its combat effectiveness as the gun's technological advances. The American military's ability to maintain an UN superiority in military technology and doctrine can be understood as a reflection of deeply ingrained cultural philosophies and organizational principles that shape how armies perceive and utilize their weaponry. At the core, the concept embodied a fundamentally different approach to the art and science of war, deeply rooted in national traditions and ideological commitments. Japanese military culture, historically intertwined with the samurai code of Bushido, placed a premium on individual valor, personal honor, and spiritual discipline. To the Japanese soldier, each rifle was not merely a tool of combat, but a sacred relic, symbolizing the emperor's divine authority and embodying a spiritual connection that required reverence and meticulous care. Their firearms were guarded as sacred objects, maintained with an almost religious devotion that extended beyond mere functionality, cementing an almost spiritual bond between the soldier and his weapon. In stark contrast, the United States military ethos had evolved through the lens of industrial democracy emphasizing mass production, mechanical efficiency, and operational advantage. American soldiers and Marines regarded their weapons primarily as reliable tools designed for consistent performance in a chaotic battlefield. The rifles and automatic weapons they carried were expected to be replaceable and disposable if necessary, serving the mission without the burden of spiritual reverence. When a weapon like the Browning automatic rifle, BAR, malfunctioned, the typical response was practical and pragmatic. Simply draw a fresh one from an abundant supply stored nearby, with little ceremony or emotional attachment. For American troops, the focus was on maintaining continuous firepower, maximizing efficiency, and minimizing downtime. This cultural divergence also manifested vividly in their training and maintenance practices. Japanese soldiers operating under tight ammunition shortages and perhaps a more limited industrial infrastructure often went into combat with fewer than 100 rounds fired in training, a stark contrast to their American counterparts. In the United States, the training model was heavily influenced by industrial principles. Standardized procedures, repetitive drills, and mechanized throughput designed to produce soldiers capable of instinctive, rapid reaction under fire. At Marine bases such as Camp Pendleton and Army facilities like Fort Benning, trainees learned to operate their weapons with precision and speed, firing over 2,000 rounds during various drills, mastering rapid magazine changes, clearing jams in seconds, and maintaining accuracy while on the move. This intensive training regimen, thousands of rounds per soldier, and hundreds of instructional hours, was made possible by the country's vast industrial capacity, which allowed the production of vast quantities of weapons and ammunition. Conversely, Japan's chronic shortages of ammunition, even during combat, meant that their soldiers seldom arrived at the front with extensive training in automatic weapon use. Their combat experience was often characterized by a lack of familiarity with their weapons, with many entering major battles having fired fewer than 100 rounds during training routines. This disparity made the difference in battlefield effectiveness and cumulative firepower starkly evident during the climactic battles of the Pacific Theater, such as Iwo Jima and Okinawa. These final battles starkly illustrated the destructive dominance of American automatic weapons, primarily the BAR and other infantry support firearms, which unleashed relentless volumes of fire that overwhelmed Japanese defenses. Despite their aggressive terrain use, strategic preparations, and formidable defensive positions, the Japanese defenders, already strained by shortages of food and water, found themselves subjected to continuous, overwhelming automatic fire, inevitably eroding their ability to move, mount counterattacks, or even effectively defend their positions. Over the span of approximately 36 days on Iwo Jima, American forces expended an estimated 12 million rounds of ammunition. And during the Greater Okinawa Campaign, over 82 days, American troops discharged a staggering 60 million rounds, largely delivered by automatic weapons, documented separately as 25 million rounds by the VTI Fight Thief Corps. This sheer volume of firepower represented the ultimate realization of modern industrial warfare, an assault of countless bullets made possible through logistics, mass production, and mechanized technology. The Japanese, already weakened by shortages of essential supplies, found themselves overwhelmed, trapped under the constant, unrelenting stream of American automatic weapons fire. Unable to effectively respond, move, or mount organized resistance, many finally succumbed in the face of an attack that was essentially an assault of industrial-produced bullets. The statistical and operational realities of these battles revealed the profound truth. Modern industrialized warfare had shifted the battlefield into one of overwhelming fire, where individual soldiers could barely envisage the scale of destruction they could unleash. Every Japanese defender faced hundreds of bullets, an entire rifle company's worth of firepower, delivered in moments by logistics chains capable of supplying vast quantities of ammunition across theaters of war. While the atomic bombs eventually ended the conflict, their devastating power overshadowed the earlier, more incremental revolution in firepower that had already reshaped battlefield dynamics. Furthermore, the preeminent display of conventional weapon superiority, in particular firearms like the BAR, had underscored that Japan's defeat was effectively sealed by their inability to match American industrial output and firepower. The unleashing of atomic destruction, catastrophic as it was, stood atop a foundation of a martial revolution driven by technological and logistical. In the course of the Pacific Campaign, it is estimated that approximately 200,000 Japanese soldiers lost their lives. Yet these figures pale in comparison to the enormous toll exacted by the relentless advance of conventional weaponry, including automatic rifles, which had already claimed far greater numbers of lives. As the war progressed, the stark reality became evident to high-ranking Japanese military officials, chief among them Admiral Sumu Toyota, who served as the Navy Chief of Staff. During the final imperial conferences, he openly acknowledged a sobering truth. Japan's fate was sealed not by the lack of courage or tactical shortcomings, but by the overwhelming superiority in conventional forces possessed by the United States, an advantage that inevitably spelled the nation's defeat. While the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki served as a catalyst that expedited Japan's surrender, they did not fundamentally alter the core mathematical and industrial realities that underpinned Japan's military predicament. The truth remained that Japan simply could not compete with American industry in the production of weapons and ammunition, a disparity that rendered many Japanese efforts to sustain their war effort ultimately futile. Post-war investigations by Japanese military officers and industrial experts, many of whom studied in America, uncovered a staggering truth about American wartime industrial capacity. They discovered that military production on the American home front was on an unimaginable scale. Official records revealed that approximately 350,000 bars of weapons, likely referring to metal bars or components, were manufactured during the war, a figure that was nearly 4 times greater than Japan's total output of all types of light machine guns combined. Each of these bars in 1944 had an estimated manufacturing cost of about $75, a significant investment reflecting the industrial might dedicated to the war effort. In stark contrast, the manufactured types of Japanese weaponry, in particular the Type 96 machine guns, exhibited a much higher cost in both materials and labor, yet they delivered inferior performance compared to their American counterparts. During visits to American factories in the 1950s, Japanese industrial delegations witnessed firsthand the sophisticated production techniques that were responsible for America's victory. They observed assembly lines humming efficiently, standardized parts manufactured to exact specifications, and rigorous quality control procedures that ensured consistency across millions of units, all the technological and organizational elements that contributed to the superior scale and quality of American weapons. It became clear that while Japan struggled to produce inferior, hand-built automatons under constant pressure, the United States employed mass manufacturing and automation to generate vast quantities of highly effective weapons. Experts and military historians have often pointed out that, in the context of modern warfare, the battle was essentially lost for Japan before it even began, an inevitability dictated not solely by tactical shortcomings, but by unassailable industrial disadvantage. In this light, the infantry automatic rifle, commonly known as the BAR, along with other automatic weapons deployed by the Americans, emerged as symbols of the futility of Japanese resistance tactics. These weapons demonstrated conclusively that victory on the battlefield was determined more by an economy of industrial might than by individual bravery. The American automatic weapons, capable of delivering sustained firepower in large volumes, established that, in the modern era of warfare, the true power lay in manufacturing capacity, not just martial spirit. Dr. Edward Dreer, a renowned historian specializing in the Pacific War, emphasized this point vividly. He noted that the advent and deployment of American automatic weapons fundamentally transformed infantry combat throughout the Pacific theater. The Japanese, unable to develop effective tactical counters, faced an insurmountable obstacle. Ultimately, their challenge was not a strategic or tactical issue, but an industrial one. They encountered an adversary able to equip every squad with automatic weapons, to supply endless streams of ammunition, and to replace battlefield losses with rapid efficiency, capabilities that Japan could not match. Looking at the statistics, the disparity becomes strikingly clear. Throughout the entire Pacific conflict, Japanese forces claimed approximately 111,000 American lives across various causes, but at the cost of an estimated 2,300,000 of their own soldiers, a ratio exceeding 20 to 1. While countless factors contributed to this overwhelming defeat, the superior arsenal of American automatic weapons was undoubtedly a crucial factor. It was a decisive element that turned away many Japanese offensives and preserved American forces, rendering Japanese tactics increasingly ineffective. The impact of the BAR, however, extended far beyond mere battlefield success, permeating into the very fabric of post-war Japanese society. The weapon that symbolized the crushing might of American industrial power also became an emblem of a transformative era. It helped demonstrate the immense potential of industrial democracy, an ideology grounded in technological innovation, mass production, and efficiency. Post-war Japan embraced these values vigorously, pioneering a remarkable economic revival. The very companies that would come to define Japan's post-war prosperity, such as Honda, Toyota, and Sony, were founded by veterans who, during the war, had witnessed firsthand America's industrial dominance. They carried with them lessons learned from observing the unparalleled scale and organization of American manufacturing processes, which in turn inspired Japan's own economic miracle. These Japanese entrepreneurs recognized that genuine national power was rooted not simply in military during the tumultuous years of warfare, especially in the context of the Second World War and its aftermath. The landscape of combat utterly transformed due to advancements in weaponry and strategic military thinking. One of the most significant aspects of this transformation involves how nations redefine their armed forces, not only through the acquisition of new weapons, but also through the evolution of military doctrines aligned with industrial capacities and technological innovations. In the period following the war, a remarkable shift occurred in Japan. The nation's military strategy transitioned from traditional militarism to a posture rooted in alliance and democratic principles. This change was reflected in the personnel and equipment of Japan's newly established self-defense forces, which instead of being armed with outdated or World War II-era weapons, were equipped in the 1950s with modern American weaponry, including the famous Browning automatic rifles, commonly known as the BARS. Approximately 10,000 of these firearms were supplied to Japan through various military assistance programs, symbolizing a profound change in international relations and military support. This means that Japanese soldiers, who not long before had faced American weaponry as opponents in ferocious battles, were now trained with the very same weapon systems that had contributed significantly to their previous defeat. It is a paradox and an ironic culmination of the shifting trajectory of Japan's military policy, moving from militarism, which driven by imperial ambitions, toward a broader alliance with democratic allies like the United States. This transformation did not merely involve weapon exchanges, but also signified a cultural and strategic adaptation. The weapons that once symbolized invasive aggression were now tools fostering cooperation and mutual understanding. Throughout subsequent decades, encounters between American and Japanese veterans during ceremonies at various Pacific battle sites became increasingly common. These reunions, often marked by mutual respect and sincere dialogue, served as powerful acts of reconciliation. Former enemies sat side by side, sharing their respective experiences on the battlefield with remarkable honesty. They reflected openly on how these weapons, particularly the BARS and other automatic firearms, had defined their wartime existence, whether as instruments of destruction or as agents of survival. In these poignant meetings, both groups recognized a profound truth, that they had been swept up in larger forces beyond their individual control. The American Marines wielded their automatic rifles as the machinery of an industrialized democracy, soldiers operating advanced weaponry in the service of national and ideological goals, while the Japanese soldiers, fighting as part of a military system rooted in feudal structure, were ultimately mere pawns caught in broader geopolitical currents. The collision of these vastly different systems led to tragedy on an unprecedented scale, but it also paved the way for profound transformation. The commemoration events held on the 50th anniversary of the Battle of Eniwetok in 1995 epitomized this transformation. During such ceremonies, American and Japanese veterans laid wreaths together at memorials, acknowledging the brutal legacy of their shared history. They recognized that the very weapons which had inflicted so much suffering also played a pivotal role in ending the war and initiating a new chapter in their nation's histories. The Browning automatic rifle, or BARSN for example, had been a deadly tool of warfare, yet, in the end, also served as an instrument that contributed to liberation from the imperatives of militarism. Analyzing the impact and scale of the weapons used during the Pacific conflict reveals insights into the scale of industrial warfare and technological dominance. Production numbers underscore this disparity profoundly. Approximately 350,000 Bars rifles were manufactured, starkly contrasting with approximately 41,000 Japanese Type 96 light machine guns, or with roughly 53,000 Type 99 light machine guns. The ratio of American to Japanese automatic weapons production stood at around 3.7 to 1, illustrating the overwhelming industrial superiority enjoyed by the United States. Combat statistics vividly encapsulate this disparity. During the Battle of Tarawa, an estimated 3 million rounds of ammunition were fired over a span of 76 hours. In the campaign of Saipan, a staggering 15 million rounds were expended in just 3 weeks. Similarly, in the Battle of Eniwetok, 12 million rounds of ammunition were used in 36 days, while the Battle of Okinawa witnessed an unimaginable 60 million rounds fired over 82 days. These figures represent the relentless and massive scale of munitions expenditure, echoing the unequal industrial capacities of the combatants. Casualty numbers further illustrate this harsh disparity. Overall, in the Pacific theater, the ratio of Japanese to American deaths was approximately 20 to 1. The Japanese military suffered around 2,300,000 deaths, with a significant portion attributable to starvation and disease, numbering about 1,400,000, constituting approximately 60% of total Japanese fatalities. Combat deaths from all causes in the Japanese armed forces reached around 900,000. These numbers tell a somber story, that despite fierce courage and determination, the Japanese forces suffered losses impossible to match in scale or speed due to overwhelming industrial and logistical disadvantages. This imbalance was underpinned by a fundamental principle of modern warfare, that America could sustain substantial losses of portable automatic weapons, estimated at, in an era when the sheer force of automatic weaponry became essential for military supremacy, nations around the world reassessed their approaches to warfare. Recognizing the profound implications of this technological shift, China, in particular, took a close look at Japan's earlier military lapses and failures. They realized that in the face of modern combat, things had fundamentally changed, prompting China to undertake a comprehensive restructuring of its armed forces, centering their doctrine around the deployment of automatic firearms. This strategic overhaul was not superficial, but rooted in deep understanding of the lessons drawn from history. Even Japan, which had developed its self-defense forces in the aftermath of its militaristic past, acknowledged that traditional infantry tactics, rooted in individual prowess and perhaps more akin to medieval valor, had become obsolete. When the Japanese self-defense forces were founded, automatic weapons became the critical foundation upon which their doctrine relied. The transformation of their military approach was thus complete and inescapable. Warfare had shifted from emphasizing personal courage and marksmanship to emphasizing massively coordinated industrial firepower. As warfare evolved over time, the focus moved away from the individual soldier's ability to shoot accurately and website. Instead, the key to victory resided in industrial-scale firepower, mass production, logistical support, and technological superiority. The key instruments of this shift could be illustrated by seizing a simple yet powerful lesson painted in blood across the Pacific theater. Heroic courage by itself was insufficient to overcome the industrial might embodied in American weaponry and manufacturing prowess. The story of Japan's military campaigns during the Second World War is inextricably linked to the lessons learned through these technological and industrial realities. One of the most pivotal figures from this period was General Tomoyuki Yamashita, who, upon his conviction for war crimes, faced execution in the year following the conflict's end. Throughout his military career, he had overseen Japanese forces in both glorious campaigns, such as the surprising victory at Singapore, and devastating setbacks like the crushing defeat in the Philippines. His career and eventual downfall encapsulated the arc of Japan's shifting fortunes. Before his execution, Yamashita profoundly reflected on the reasons behind Japan's ultimate defeat. He came to understand that Japan had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of modern warfare. Victory was no longer solely about exceptional heroism or swordsmanship. Rather, it depended heavily on a comprehensive understanding of the destructive potential of industrialized firepower, which Japan had underestimated. Other Japanese commanders, many of whom survived the war, arrived at similar realizations. They grasped that devices like the machine gun, such as the famous BAR, Browning Automatic Rifle, represented more than just superior firepower. They embodied a systemic, industrially produced strength. The BAR, as an example, was a product of America's vast factories and its unrivaled logistical systems. It was not merely a weapon wielded by individual soldiers, but a symbol of a broader system, an expression of industrial democracy's ability to mass-produce advanced weaponry while maintaining consistent quality and fostering ongoing innovation. Japan's warrior tradition, once highly revered in their military culture, had been brought face to face with these realities in the theater of industrial conflict. The predictable result was that traditional martial valor was no longer enough to secure victory. Captain Mitsuo Fuchida, the Japanese leader of the attack on Pearl Harbor, later survived the war and reflected deeply on the nature of American military power. He recognized that weapons like the BAR did not demonstrate American superiority through individual skill alone, but rather through the systematic harnessing of industry, an entire society mobilized for the purpose of war. Every bar rifle was a product of American factories, meticulously crafted and shipped through a network of logistics, supported by trained personnel across the country. It represented a macrocosm of American strength, an entire nation committed to producing the tools necessary for industrialized warfare. Today, visitors to military museums across Japan can observe displays of American weapons from the Second World War, including the iconic BAR. These artifacts serve as tangible reminders of the technological and industrial advances that contributed decisively to Japan's defeat in the Pacific. Young Japanese visitors, in particular, study these relics to understand how their nation's militaristic ambitions were ultimately subdued by the collective strength of industrial democracy, an industrial economy that prioritized factory production, systematic organization, and technological innovation over individual heroism or martial tradition. The lessons carried by these weapons are stark. In the modern era, national security and military effectiveness derive less from a warrior's brave spirit and more from a nation's industrial capacity. Victory depends on its ability to produce vast quantities of advanced weaponry, to organize its resources systematically, and to maintain technological superiority. The willingness to die for one's country, while historically important, has taken a secondary role to the capacity to produce and sustain the war effort on an industrial scale. The courage of individual soldiers is no longer enough. Instead, victory hinges on systemic organization of factories, logistics, and technological innovation. The story of Japan's transition from a militant empire to a peaceful economic power is, in large part, a narrative shaped by during the fierce and devastating conflict of the Second World War, particularly in the Pacific Theater. The Battle of Okinawa stands as a grim testament to the brutal final chapters of that global confrontation. Lieutenant General Mitsuru Ushima, commanding the Japanese 32nd Army, faced an inevitable and crushing defeat as Allied forces advanced inexorably toward victory. By June 22nd, in the year 1945, just shy of the war's end, Ushima, recognizing the futility of continued resistance against the overwhelming Allied military might, chose to end his life through ritual suicide, a practice deeply rooted in Japanese tradition meant to preserve honor in the face of inevitable dishonor and defeat. His chief of staff accompanied him in this final act, symbolizing a tragic end born out of duty, despair, and an understanding that surrender was not an option. His last directives to his troops, transmitted before his death, carried an unmistakable acknowledgement of the hopelessness of their situation. He explicitly conveyed that further resistance was pointless given the hopeless disparity in battlefield power, an acknowledgement that the Allies possessed an insurmountable advantage in virtually every conceivable category. The American forces confronting Ushima's forces boasted an extraordinary dominance in artillery, which could devastatingly bombard enemy positions. Air support that marinated the battlefield in relentless, precise firepower. Naval gunfire that rained destruction from the sea onto land-based targets. And perhaps most emblematic of the new era of warfare, automatic weapons. While the Browning automatic rifle, better known by its initials BAR, was only one element within this broader spectrum of technological superiority, it poignantly symbolized the entire industrial-led advantage of the United States. This weapon was not merely a tool of combat, but a manifest marker of the industrial age's superiority, illustrating how modern technology had fundamentally reshaped the art and science of warfare. On the multitude of rocky island entrances in the Pacific, scarred still by bullet impacts and shrapnel, lay silent testimony to this collision of two military philosophies. One rooted in traditional combat and individual heroism, the other deeply embedded in industrial efficiency, automation, and mass production. Those scarred entrances to caves define a somber history. Inside, Japanese soldiers faced a modern minimalism of death. Trapped in labyrinths where automatic fire garnered silent victory, often striking with lethal accuracy without ancestors' cherished notions of honor-driven combat. Here, amidst the relentless echoes of bar rounds bouncing off stone walls, lay illuminated a profound transformation. That the machine gun's relentless, industrial efficiency wasn't merely capable of winning battles, but was emblematic of warfare's evolution from personal valor and individual combat to a systematic industrial process. In those caves, in the darkness pierced by frangible projectiles, lay tragic witnesses to the terrible efficacy of modern industrial democracy, a term representing a war driven by technological and manufacturing prowess rather than individual martial courage. The legacy of the Browning automatic rifle across the Pacific theater extended beyond mere victory. It represented the dawn of a new era, the transformation of how nations understood and wielded power. Military victory in the industrial age was no longer solely about the bravery of soldiers or heroic feats. It increasingly hinged on production capacity, technological ingenuity, and organizational efficiency. Every burst of automatic fire that echoed through those war-torn islands delivered a lesson, a brutal education in this new mechanized reality. For Japanese soldiers caught in the labyrinth of caves and tunnels, this relentless barrage was more than a tactical assault. It was a lesson in the immutable dominance of industrially produced weaponry. These soldiers paid the ultimate price, loss of life, to absorb the harsh truths that modern warfare, defined by mass production and technological innovation, would not favor the bravest alone, but would favor those who controlled the factories and the manufacturing processes of war material. Through this relentless demonstration, the Browning automatic rifle inadvertently achieved what no diplomatic treaty or negotiation could. It forcibly conveyed to Japan, through the language of bloodshed and fire, the irrevocable reality that military aggression, directed against an industrial democracy, was neither prudent nor feasible in the long term. The lessons learned amid the smoke and flames of Pacific Islands, from the jungles of Guadalcanal to the tunnels of Okinawa, left an indelible mark that would influence Japan profoundly. This brutal lesson of industrial power and technological dominance contributed heavily to the eventual transformation of Japan itself. The devastating but enlightening experience steered Japan onto a different path, away from military conquest and toward pacifism, rebuilding itself as a nation that prioritized economic development and industrial growth. From the earliest moments when a Marine gunnery team first pulled the trigger on a Browning automatic rifle, initiating a revolutionary change in warfare, Japan's outlook shifted dramatically. The escalating violence and technological advancements in World War II irrevocably dismantled long-held martial traditions, replacing them with an understanding that victory came from industrial capacity and technological prowess rather than individual heroism. In the grand narrative of the Pacific War, the story of the Browning automatic rifle is ultimately a powerful reflection of how the vast industrial capacities of the formidable capacity for sustained fire, and significant destructive power, showcased by the Browning automatic rifle, served as a stark lesson in the brutal truth of warfare. one that can only be truly understood through the language of conflict itself. Its overwhelming and unmistakable presence on the battlefield demonstrated in the clearest terms the devastating effectiveness of relentless, lethal force. This weapon, emblematic of technological advancement and tactical might, delivered a powerful message. In war, survival often hinges on the ability to deploy overwhelming firepower swiftly and decisively. Through its relentless fire across the battlefield, the Browning automatic rifle made it abundantly clear that when it comes to combat, no other language is as compelling or as effective as sheer, unmitigated force.